back to the 50 billion. So when Alexander Graham Bell made his first call in 1876 and said, "Please come here, Mr. Watson," were his first words, he couldn't have imagined that in 100 years later that he'd have 500 million subscribers on wireline services and conventional wireline replaced by broadband services. So that takes you to that 500 million level of the connections by place, if you like. An inflection point with the introduction of cellular systems at the turn of last century really gave you a point where you're allowed to get to a subscriber level of about 5 billion subscribers today, probably going up to 6 or 7 billion, topping out at that in terms of the population of the planet being about 6. That gives you the next inflection point. But really the hockey stick curve here is generated by the Internet of Things, where if you look at 5 billion going to 50 billion, that says each of those subscribers or individuals would have 10 different devices connected to the network. So for example, your car, so if you use OnStar, for example, that's carried over a Verizon CDMA network. If you have your consumer devices, so your cameras or your MP3 players, your e-readers, all connected to the network, your electricity meter, your fridge, doesn't take long to get to 10 devices per person. And that's the kind of logic that we're using to get to the 50 billion level. So that's great. How does it work with CDMA, as we mentioned earlier? So CDMA is a good technology for machine-to-machine. Has great end-to-end quality of service, low latency, low connection time, and one of the particular unique features is management of how the device talks to the network. So there's the paging channel, so the device has to handshake with the network on a regular basis. In CDMA, you can determine how often that happens. Why is that important? That's important for battery life. So these devices, if you're in a utility meter somewhere in remote, running off a battery potentially for backup, you want that to be low. So paging control is important. So there's kind of 3 or 4 parameters of the CDMA network which make it lend itself to being effective machine-to-machine. In the rise of the machines, what will happen to the business model? There'll be a number of changes. It's going to be a different world. Before, it was an operator and a vendor working together to provide a network and sell mainly to an individual, dealing with a personal service. Now, the operator and the vendor together needs to deal with someone selling wireless Coke machines or doing fleet management or a utility company. So where there is a gap is in the understanding and the knowledge of that vertical segment. So there will be a requirement for a partner or an understanding of that vertical segment to effectively address segment by segment as you go to transport, healthcare, etc. You need segment expertise. So that will change the model and how the industry goes about selling into those verticals. And the revenue generated in those verticals will be important, I believe, for telecoms as we go forward. The management of 1 or 2 devices per person moving to many devices per person has some challenges for the network. For example, you can't give every electric utility meter in the US its own phone number. So how do you do that? You have to have a new addressing scheme. Maybe it's through IP addressing. Even that's not effective enough. So standards and the approach to networks will have to change to deal with just the sheer number of those, as well as things like authentication. So changes in the network. Quality of service, the expectation that we each have of the network is such that if a cell site goes down, it's something that we can live with. It's you have a certain expectation of cellular service. But when mission-critical services are delivered over that, so utility, if your power station that you built is dimensioned on relying on the fact you have efficiencies in a smart grid, that can't go down. If you're using the system to monitor a healthcare or heart patient, obviously mission-critical. So the expectation and control of the service level agreement will be different. And then you have things like if the network does go down when it comes up, if you have every device communicating its status at the same time, how do you manage that kind of situation? So again, changes in the network to deal with the sheer numbers involved here. And lastly, when you think about the expectation and the business case of these vertical applications, it's much longer term. A personal contract is a couple of years. These vertical industries are looking at 10 to 15 years. And so that requires operators and the vertical partner and the vendor to commit to long-term contracts, which in itself pushes out the expectation and life cycle of CDMA. So we talk about 2020 as being a kind of table stakes and you're looking at 2025, you're really looking a long time out there for operators to be able to sign up and make the commitments necessary for this machine-to-machine market. So there's going to be a number of changes required in the market to deal with this machine-to-machine space. So in summary, I think managing the exaflood, dealing with the 450 megahertz space, and dealing with the machine-to-machine space, building a new Skynet, will keep the industry busy for the foreseeable future. Thanks very much.